Welcome to Real GM Radio. Are the Thunder set up to be the most dominant team in the NBA of the next decade? And where do the Timberwolves go from here? Plus, some under-the-radar offseason trade targets. Before we jump in, do me a favor, subscribe to our brand new YouTube channel to watch the podcast, tune into our best segments, and join the Real GM Radio community. Find us on youtube.com/@RealGMRadio. It is Real GM Radio. I'm Wes Goldberg here with a brand new guest to the show, Esfandiar Baraheni. You know him from the Athletic Daily NBA show. You do a great job on that. Really excited to catch up with you and talk with you about a bunch of stuff here, including some offseason topics. But we got to start with the Thunder. Their defense was dominant, not just against the Timberwolves in those last two games, but during their whole run through the Western Conference. I'm going to throw some stats at you, and then I want to get your reaction.
Cool.
Best defensive rating with at least 15 playoff games played since 2019, half a decade ago, which was basically a different era. So you can't even really count it.
Yeah.
Their defensive rating actually got better in the playoffs than it was in the regular season. Not all that surprising. Opponents scored at at least a league average rate just 3 times against the Thunder this entire postseason. League average.
Oh my God.
They forced a steal on at least 1 out of 10 of their opponent possessions in 10 of their 16 playoff games.
That's absurd.
And then I stole this one from Owen Phillips, who does a great job on his Substack. The largest playoff turnover differential.
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring that one up. Nice. Yeah.
It's incredible. The Thunder are the number 1 team, and by a wide margin. They have a plus 100-point turnover differential in these 2025 playoffs. Is that what stands out to you about this defense?
Yeah, man, turnovers. I mean, I saw, shout out to Owen Phillips, but he also has been tracking teams that end up winning the turnover battle. And I think, and now it's like 53-20 in the playoffs, where if you don't turn over the ball as much as your opponent, you have a really, really good chance of winning the game. OKC just does it better than anybody, probably better than anybody I've ever seen. And I got a chance to watch that 2019 Raptors team up close, which is second in that point differential kind of thing. They really are. The way that they play defense isn't natural to me. You know, in this era, it doesn't make sense that, you know, we're going to concede a ton of threes. We're going to pinch in on all of our drives. We're going to make it so that you have to see tons of ball handlers, and in an era of like pace and space, and the literally the area in which you have to guard is larger than ever before. The fact that they're able to turn the ball over as much as they do just shouldn't happen, but it does. And they do it better than basically anybody ever has. It's absurd. It really is absurd. Yeah.
The word that keeps coming to mind every time I watch the Thunder over the last 2 years is terrifying. They just go on these runs, and I'm like, this has to be terrifying.
Yeah.
For you as a ball handler. I'm sure you saw like on one of the ESPN channels when Tim Legler would do like, he would put the VR goggles on and he would just like put himself in them. He'd be like Anthony Edwards or Julius Randle, and he's like in the middle of the defense, and you just got like all these bodies swarming at you. Can you imagine being in that situation where it's, oh my God, Lou Dort's in front of me. All right, we got the switch. Oh my God, now it's Alex Caruso, and it's now it's Jalen Williams or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I love the way that you put it, that it's not natural, because it feels so different than what everything else is happening in the NBA. Just every other defense. And they've created this shell defense where they've got like 2 or 3 guys starting to press you when they really want to, starting to press you at half court. And in the last 2 games, what really struck me is Minnesota, every time they wanted to try to get into their action, they had to go so wide on their actions, whether they were coming off of a player was coming off of a pin down, or Anthony Edwards was coming off of a screen or whatever. They just had to go so wide, not because that's what they wanted to do, but almost because they were quite literally running away from the Thunder defenders, and you just don't see that stuff.
Yeah, it's very wide is actually a really great way to describe it, because anytime you're running a pick and roll or anything of that regard, right? Even a dribble handoff, whatever, you're trying to get downhill. Right. You're trying to get into the teeth of the defense, but they just do such a great job of walling off the paint. And it's a testament to their point of attack defenders in Lou Dort, in Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, all those guys who just do such a good job of making life hell for you. The cool thing about like the OKC's defense, and I guess if we're thinking about like future ramifications and all that, right? Cool. It's a copycat league. Everybody's going to try to replicate this. But can everybody replicate this?
Right.
Is it possible? I thought Minnesota last year was a great defense, a very, very great defense. I mean, they caused a lot of trouble for the Denver Nuggets, and it was like, okay, this is a team that can really elevate what they can do defensively. I thought they had a lot of the same point of attack defenders. You know, you think of Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Jaden McDaniels, guys who can really guard. But even they couldn't really muster up any sort of offensive like flow against the and that's more of a question about their own offensive process and whatnot. But I look at this Thunder team and it's like, this is not, you can't replicate this.
Right.
This is not a copycat league where you're like, I'm going to go out and get 10 guys who guard as hard as OKC does consistently. It's just not possible to do that without having some weak links in there.
Right. And that swap of moving Giddey out as the weak link from last year's team to moving Alex Caruso in.
Yeah.
Kind of just, it filled in every gap. Right. And you're like what they do to pinch off those driving lanes and that point of attack defense that they have. I mean, they're on the boxes and elbows. And then they've got Alex Caruso in this box and one, and they could just throw this at you. And I was trying to come up with like nicknames because even the Caruso box and one isn't like other box and one. Like you've seen the box and one with that Toronto team with Van Vliet at the top of it in the 2019 finals. But it's like, is it like the box and bald? Like, it's just, it needs a nickname because it's so good. It's such a great unit.
Yeah, no, it is. That's a good nickname, honestly. It's like, look, boxes and elbows is the way that you would describe it because they stay on all of the elbows, right? And they're basically saying like, we will concede corner threes. I'm pretty sure they're like 27th or 28th in opponents' corner threes allowed, right? And that hasn't changed for them. Like, I think the only game that Minnesota won in this series, they hit like 11 of 18 of their corner threes. So they really exploited that aspect. But they do such a good job of recovering out. It's like, even if you were able to get past Alex Caruso, find a way to get into the paint, which I thought Anthony Edwards did a valiant job of in this series. They do such a good job of recovering. They're on a string. You know, post game, Anthony Edwards said it's like 15 puppets on a string, right? And it is. It really does feel like that because, you know, again, to kind of refer to that 2019 Raptors team, which also forced a lot of turnovers. If you go back and watch some of those highlights, it is a communication thing, like understanding intuitively where you're supposed to be when a ball is a certain place, right? And that can come naturally for teams. It's just very, very compelling the way though OKC does it. I think it's really entertaining. I've seen a lot of people talk about the fact that like OKC is not an entertaining team to watch, and I'm just befuddled by that because
I don't get it at all. I love watching this team.
Yeah,
they're league pass #1. If the Thunder are on, sorry other team, it's going to be a bad night for you.
100%.
And I'm glad you brought that up about Anthony Edwards because I did think that he did a tremendous job doing the job. Get into the paint, kick out the shooters. Sorry if Jaden McDaniels goes 0 for 6 in the first quarter, but they force the turnovers and they deserve to force the turnovers. And then they force so many turnovers that they get in your head. And in the first quarter of last night's game, you could even see there was like 3 or 4 unforced turnovers, just bad passes, dribbling off your foot because you're just hearing footsteps. So it has like this compounding effect where, I don't know, it almost reminds me of the peak Dynasty Warriors where you kind of just ended up beating yourself because you knew Steph was about to hit 3 3-pointers in 2 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And it almost is starting to feel that way, but on the defensive side for Oklahoma City. The other part of this with the Thunder is that repeatable, like can teams copycat it? Can teams try to do it?
Yeah.
I do think that we're seeing a development in the league in terms of ball pressure being really important and an importance on steals, right? If we're in a league where everybody now can shoot the 3-pointer, you know, at least pretty well, and everybody's just so efficient and efficiency is going up all the time. If you're not going to be able to stop your opponent from scoring when they get a shot as much as you used to, you got to stop your opponent from getting a shot.
Yeah, totally. It's
and the Thunder were on the forefront of that.
Yeah, 100%. And this is funny you said that. So I wrote something about a couple of months ago about like reactive versus proactive defenders. And it's basically the idea that there's some guys out there who are extremely proactive in not letting you get to your spots early on, right? Lou Dort is an incredible proactive defender. He is there at the forefront of things, making sure that like you're not getting to the shot that you want to get to. Then there's reactive defenders like I think OG Anunoby is a really great reactive defender in the sense that an opening will happen and he is very quick to clean it up for the Knicks. This is some sort of trend that we're seeing throughout the league where it's like, okay, there is more of an emphasis on turning the ball over, to your point. There's more of an emphasis on, cool, we'll concede some level of shot, whatever it is. It'd be the corner three. If we're conceding mid-range shots like the Pacers do, we're able to concede that. But at the same time, we know what our goal is. Our goal is to, one, pressure. And the other aspect of pressure, by the way, is the shot clock. You're playing against 24 seconds. And so if every single time down the floor, and the Pacers do this very well, OKC obviously does this very well. If every single time down the floor, you're starting at 16 or 15 or 14 seconds on the clock versus 20, that's a huge difference. And you look at efficiency across the league. You can even go to NBAstats.com and sift through like the shot clock efficiency, whatever. It obviously goes down as the amount of time that you have on the clock goes down. So it's just one of those things, again, an analytical wrinkle here, where teams are starting to realize, like, cool, if we get you down to 7 seconds, 8 seconds, now it's us forcing the issue against you on the offense. It's not you trying to get a shot against us. It's you working against the clock and us.
It's a similar trade-off to sort of when we used to talk about crashing for offensive boards versus getting back in transition defense. The getting back in transition defense was more of a preventative thing. Crashing the offensive boards was trying to create those extra possessions. And sort of the mental calculus that teams had to make was, all right, are we good enough at crashing the boards to where if we do it at a certain degree, we're creating enough possessions, extra possessions for us that's, worth the trade-off of maybe we give up a couple of easy transition bucket and just some runouts. The Thunder are doing it where, okay, we're probably going to end up giving up some wide open corner threes that look pretty bad. But if we're creating 4, 5, 6 extra possessions a game out of just blitzing you at half court, then we're coming out on top on the possession battle. And then after that, if we're coming up on top of the possession battle, we also have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's one of the most efficient bucket getters in the league. He's going to make the most out of those possessions, and we feel pretty good about it. And that's the other part about why this isn't repeatable, is that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a two-way player, right? And I actually think that's why Anthony Edwards and the Timberwolves might be able to get to a point to do it. But even like McDaniels, as good of a defender as he is, he got beat by Luka in the playoffs last year in the Western Conference Finals. He didn't really defend Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that well in this one. He has a harder time with those bigger, stronger, more deliberate point guard type scorer guys. Whereas the Thunder, they've got Shai, but they also have Jalen Williams, who can guard Julius Randle, somebody that who just crushed Draymond Green in the previous series. They've got Lou Dort, they've got Caruso, they've got like every size and weight of defender that you would need to guard any kind of offensive player. And that's the other part, is their versatility on their defense too kind of helps them do all of these things.
Yeah, they have so many options to throw at you. You can go big with OKC. It could be Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren together, and you're like, all right, man, we're not scoring in the paint tonight. And then they could go smaller against you. They did that against Minnesota a couple times in the series where it was Chet at the 5, and they have Jalen Williams and Lou Dort and Kason Wallace and all those guys kind of like just mucking things up constantly, forcing turnovers. That's their like forcing turnover lineup, right? Then they can go extra small and just not have Chet or Hartenstein on there. And it's just a bunch of, 6'5" guys who are just dogs and love getting into your body. And look, Caruso is the best of them all. Honestly, truly, like one of the best defenders in the world at what he does. So the way that he's able to, I guess, spur on everybody else to also lock in defensively, that's another quality this Thunder team has, is that like they feed on other guys getting stops. So if one guy forces a turnover, it's sort of like this multiplication kind of thing where other guys start to buy in and dig in on forcing turnovers too. It's cool, man. It really is cool. And to your point about the possession battle, that's why you see teams who struggle offensively really emphasize the offensive glass, because they're like, we need to get as many opportunities as we can.
Houston
I know
Rockets,
that Houston Rockets, I know that as a guy who covered the Raptors this season, they were terrible offensively. And so they were like, we need to be one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league. They were one of the best, because they just need to game the possession battle. And that is corner crashes. And so that's sort of the push and pull of forcing turnovers and winning the possession battle versus offensive teams saying, all right, cool, we're not going to win the possession battle, but maybe we can find a bit of an edge on the offensive glass. And now there's zone, which is another wrinkle to this. You see more zone in the playoffs now than ever, but yeah, anyways.
Is this the best defense you've ever seen? I'm not asking, and that's a
Yeah.
specific question. I don't know how. I think you're probably around the same age as I am.
Yeah.
So like, okay, people talk about the 97 Bulls, or for instance, right?
Yeah.
Or some of these
Yeah.
80s Celtics teams. I'm like, dude, I wasn't born for those 80s Celtics teams.
Right. Yeah.
And the 97 Bulls, I wasn't exactly sifting through the advanced stats, you know, when I was 6 or 7 years old. So in terms of the best defenses I've ever seen, I think the first great defense, I was like, wow, that seems like a nightmare. That doesn't seem like a good time. Were the those early 2000s Pistons teams.
Yeah, for sure. That's the one I would think of too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is this the best? So then I'm not asking you if this is the best defense of all time. Just you personally, best defense you've ever seen this Thunder team.
So the Pistons are one for sure. Yes, I think that's the one that I think of. But like again, such a completely different era, right? Like
Right.
you think of the rule changes that happened in that time, right? That allowed the Pistons team to play a little bit differently than what we see now, and also, like I said, the space that you have to cover now compared to 2004 basketball.
Right.
I mean, if you go on like any highlight reel and you search up 2004 Pistons highlights, it's like everybody is packed into that 16 to 15-foot area that they're rarely using the 3-point line. Whereas now it's like everybody is spread out. You know, it's 5-out offense for the most part. There might be a guy inside there that likes to dominate, but that's so much harder to guard to me than what you see nowadays. So it's hard to compare. I do think that like in recent memory, I would throw the 2019 Raptors in there. I think they were a really, really good defensive team. You look up and down that roster, wildly talented defensive roster. The 2020 Lakers were also really impressive, although I wouldn't put those teams in this category. It's just this is how absurd this team is. You know, we can list a lot of great defensive teams, and still it doesn't feel like they are comparable to what we're seeing right now with OKC. I mean, I saw this stat, and I think I dropped it in on Twitter, but like they're the 4th team in NBA history to win 80 games before the finals. You know, it's the 96 Bulls, the 97 Bulls, the 2016 Warriors, and now the Thunder. Like that is how good they are. So it's hard to compare and say, well, this team is better defensively or this team is better defensively because they're bucking every trend, you know?
They're the best defense I've ever seen. I'm ready to say it. But the closest thing that I can come up with is those peak Draymond, Durant, Andre Iguodala Warriors, but it was really different, right? Like what they could do for a quarter. It was like, you know, the fire hydrant, you just let it go and then all the water comes out, right? And then you're just like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. It's impenetrable. We can't do it. But they could really only do it that way. They couldn't do it for 48 minutes. That wasn't in their wheel. What this Thunder team can do is that's why, like I say, waves. Like it comes in waves. It's just constant and it's all the time and it's 48 minutes. And I can't remember a team like we've seen great defensive units, right? Who you're just like, wow, when that 5 is on the court, that's their defensive special lineup, and they're gonna just overwhelm you. But it's every lineup all the time with this Thunder team. So it's just the sustainability of their defense. I think I'm fine saying it. This is the best defense I've ever watched. Like it's clearly, and
I'm there with
thing
you.
Is huge.
It's just hard to compare to anybody else. Like, we can. As you mentioned, the Warriors. I'm like, oh man, like the Spurs in that era were really good defensively. You think of Kawhi and Tim Duncan, and like even late Tim Duncan, like they were really, really good defensively. They were right there with the Warriors in that 2016 season. So I think of that, and I'm like, yeah, but this still is on a different level. This still does not compare to what we saw back then. And I think I'm with you, man. This is the best defense we've seen.
I want to tie together some themes that we've been talking about here in terms of the repeatability, the copycat part of this. Can anybody do it? Their youth, how deep they are, all the things that we're talking about. And this is sort of a talking point, but I think it's worth bringing up right now. Is this the team that's best positioned to dominate the league like over the next? I've seen 10 years thrown out there. That seems like a lot. Every time we think a team is going to dominate for 10 years, they end up something happens in year 3 or 4.
I mean, even the Warriors didn't dominate for 10 years, right? Yeah.
And I think we're in a stage now where I think we're in 5-year life cycles in the NBA, where I think even Boston felt like they were so positioned to be the dynasty after last year's run, and then even before the Jason Tatum injury, they were losing to the Knicks, all these things, and the wheels just sort of came off a little bit, and they started to wobble.
Yeah.
But this Thunder team is so cost controlled. If you look at the cap sheet. They've got all these guys. They're just entering their prime. I don't even like Chet. I wouldn't even consider in his prime. Not even close to it. I'm like Jalen Williams is 23.
Yeah, It doesn't seem like they're really in their primes either. No.
Is this the our
So
next? Has this been our best bet at the next dynasty
yeah.
since Durant signed with Golden State in 2016?
So I look at it like I thought the Celtics and Nuggets both had really, really good paths to being sustainable
Me too.
championship contenders over the next couple of years. But as you said, it kind of fizzled out, right? And things happen that make things fizzle out in a way that you might not expect. So obviously the Tatum injury, but also to your point, I think there was some like inconsistency with the Celtics this season that they just did not have in their championship year. I think generally it's actually really hard to repeat in the NBA. So how are you going to be able to sustainably do that? The Nuggets obviously were kind of victim to cap crunch and not paying the money, or cheap ownership, whatever you want to call it, but generally like just not retaining their bench guys. And so their depth got depleted in a way that you couldn't replenish. That is not going to be the case for OKC because of the future draft pick capital,
Right.
because of the fact that they have guys who, like you said, Jalen Williams, Chet Holmgren, honestly, even Casey Wallace, like these guys are going to get better. They have a lottery pick waiting in the wing in Nikola Topic, who I don't know if he'll end up being good, but apparently they're very high on him. We'll see. And they also have 2 picks in this draft that they're going to work with. They also have multiple picks moving forward in the future that they can play around with. And I do think there is a situation where, like, actually I was talking to this about with Andrew Schlecht of the NBA Daily, and he was kind of breaking down the cap stuff for them. OKC has paid the tax before. This is something that people don't know, or maybe just think that OKC doesn't pay the tax because of the whole James Harden thing, but they've paid the tax like 5 times in the last 10 seasons or 12 seasons. They're going to be willing to pay the tax again, especially if they win a championship this year. So they go into the tax, they extend Jalen Williams, they extend Chet Holmgren. They obviously have that massive extension for SGA that's going to be coming in the wings. And you have some fluidity in the sense that Isaiah Hartenstein has a team option in a couple of seasons, in the sense that Lou Dort, I believe, has a player option or a team option on his final year in a couple of seasons. You have fluidity in what you can do trade-wise to like constantly replenish the back end of that roster and rotation, which I don't think any other team really has. So to answer, yes, I think they're well positioned. I think they're incredibly well positioned, but it's just a weird era where things can really quickly shift. And teams that I was very confident on in the Celtics and Nuggets fizzled out in ways that we imagined. So I don't know. It's hard for me to come out and say, yes, they're like the next dynasty. This is the next team, just because we haven't really seen anybody do it. But it's one of those things where it's like, someone has to do it in order for it to be the case. You know what I mean?
Right. But you look at the teams over the last, I don't know, decade that were dynasties that won multiple championships within, 2, 3, 4 years.
Yeah.
It was the big 3 Heat and those Warriors teams with Steph and Durant. And the thing that both of those teams had in common was 2 top 5 players.
Yeah.
Right. You had Dwayne Wade and LeBron, and then you had Steph and Durant. Where as much as we like Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren, they're not top 5 guys, right? And that's like, okay, big deal. They they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's obviously one of the best 5 guys. So they're not really following that same crazy, extraordinary formula that those teams had. But at the same time, they're way deeper than those teams. They and unlike Denver and really Boston, like Boston, Jason Tatum goes down with the Achilles, and you lose a season, right?
Yeah.
And that's just what's going to happen. It doesn't mean it's the end of Boston's run, but it's definitely a gap year. Like, God forbid, like Chet Holmgren goes down with something like an ACL or something horrible.
Right.
They have all these draft picks that they could just use to just be like, here, take Chet off our hands. We're going to go get another guy who's not Chet Holmgren, but is 50% of Chet Holmgren. If we get 50% of Chet Holmgren and all of Isaiah Hartenstein's still here, we could probably still manufacture some pretty decent paint defense and get the things that we want to get. And so they're kind of like fortified against some of those things that brought down Denver and Boston, because they have all this extra draft capital and these assets that they can move. I thought, like, if they were to lose in the playoffs, before the postseason began, I said, like, people were, what are the Thunder going to do if they lose? I'm like, they can kind of just do whatever they want. Like, what's an option for these other teams?
It's not an option. Like they
have more options, right?
They have more options. Yeah.
I do the Locked On Heat show, and I would just tell people, I'm like, what if the Thunder lost in the second round because they couldn't make any threes, and then they just called the Heat and they said, "We'll give you 4 first rounders for Tyler Hero."
Yeah,
Like no other team can really do that, but the Thunder can, right? There's like he's
right.
an elite 3-point shooter. Here's 4 first-round picks. Give them to us, and
Yeah,
they'd almost have to say yes. We
yeah.
don't really want to trade Tyler Hero. That's a lot of picks.
Yeah, they can basically top any offer you have, and that's why they always get thrust into these like Giannis conversations,
Right.
KD, whoever, right? They can just involve themselves, and they will instantly be the number one buyer. The other thing I think that's kind of similar to what you said about the Warriors is that the Warriors cap structure wise were in a unique situation because of Steph's ankles, right? Where it was like, all right, Steph's on a pretty cool contract, so we can go out and sign KD. We can
And then
go
they
out
got
and fill out
the
a
cap spike
and they had
that
the
year
cap
too.
spike. It's not similar to that, but in a similar way, when they traded for Gordon Hayward and he became an expiring salary, and they were like, "All right, cool. Now we have the opportunity to trade for or sign Isaiah Hartenstein," and they also kind of maintained their flexibility by
Mm-hmm.
having Isaiah Hartenstein on a team option in 2026, 2027. I'm looking at their cap sheet right now. It kind of gives them that flexibility. Also, the fact that Shai is still on his current contract for another 2 seasons, so you have 2 more seasons after this one. Let's say they win the championship this year. You have 2 more seasons to win another one. And then after that, it's like, all right, cool. You become an expensive team. Yes, you have to be more prudent with what you do in the draft and how you kind of replenish the back end of your roster rotation wise and how you're going to extend Case and Wallace and all those guys. But for now, you have like a 2 or 3 year window to maximize as many championships as you possibly can. And beyond that, I think you're in a very, very good position to say we
Mm-hmm.
have Jalen Williams, who eventually, in 3 years will be 26, and Chet Holmgren will be 25, and Shai will be 30. But that's a very, very good launching point for
Right.
the second half of this dynasty. So yeah, I mean, now looking at the money wise, you're like they're in a pretty similar situation to what the Warriors were, where it's like they might be able to thread that needle of winning and then also being financially able to do so,
It's a great call, right? And I think that's the biggest lesson that Presti probably learned from 2012.
Mhm.
Because I think my critique of Presti back then was he was just so dedicated to building through youth. Like he had Durant and Harden and Westbrook, and then they had traded Harden, and I think he just kept trying to say like, let's just draft the next Harden or whatever it
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
and never really fleshed out the roster with vets that they
Mhm.
clearly needed. And to me, my big takeaway when they signed Hartenstein and traded for Caruso was he learned his lesson from 10 years ago,
Yeah.
where he's like, no, we need these guys. It's okay. Like we've got the youth guys. These guys popped. They panned out.
Yeah.
Let's go for this thing.
And you could
And
also find other vets eventually, right? Like
yep.
you in a couple of years, you'll be able to find your next Hartenstein. You'll be able to find maybe not a Caruso, that he's a very rare breed of player, but like
Right.
you can find guys who can replicate some of their skill sets eventually, right? When those guys age out too.
Yep. I was just thinking about the best 24 and under players and how many the Thunder have.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't go through the whole, like I could probably go 20 deep and they might have 3 or 4 of those guys.
Sure.
I went top 7, no
Okay.
particular order. Anthony Edwards, Wembanyama,
Yeah.
Cunningham, Bencaro,
Mm-hmm.
Mobley,
Yeah.
and then Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren. They have to be on that list, somewhere on that list. Again, no
Sure.
order.
Yeah.
2 of the top 7 guys, 24 and under, plus Shai, who's 26, 27 years old. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's crazy.
That's bizarre.
Let's talk about the team that they beat, the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Cool.
Weird situation for them. So on one hand, they're coming off of 2 straight Western Conference Finals. You got to feel good about that, especially considering the history of the Timberwolves franchise. You got to feel really good about that.
Yep.
At the same time, on the other hand, they feel really far away.
Mm.
I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Interesting. I don't think, I mean, look, compared to OKC this season, yes, they are very far away, right? But I think the rest of the West is very far away, and I think it's hard to call this specific season of OKC like the benchmark moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
because I think if you looked at the East last year and you saw what Boston did to the East, you're like, man, the rest of the East is very far away from what Boston is doing. But Cleveland ended up winning 60 plus games and Boston faltered a little bit. And it's like, all right, Indiana is now headed to the finals. So things can change so quickly
Mm-hmm.
where I think Minnesota has the tools. The moving forward, like the next step for me is, all right, Rudy Gobert is aging. How do you end up replacing that for you? Mike Conley, his ball handling is immense for what you do. Obviously, he's older. I think he's like 37, about to be maybe 38. How do you replace that? They obviously have Rob Dillingham. We'll see if he ends up being a major part of that rotation next season. But that's the main thing. It's like they're in a transition phase where it actually feels like, if anything, they should be building more. And they're headed in, I don't want to say they're headed in the wrong direction, but it does somehow feel that way, where they're headed towards more of a retool than amping up.
Right.
And so, yes, they've reached this precipice, but it's like, can they maintain that and move forward instead of taking a step back to try and retool around it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a better way of saying what I was trying to say, right? Because if you
Fair,
were in
fair,
two straight Western Conference Finals with a 23-year-old superstar, 24-year-old superstar in Anthony Edwards, you'd be like, hey,
Yeah,
we're just starting this championship window. Let's, like, you feel good about that.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. With Gobert, he's aging. Conley's aging. These guys are aging. And their big three of, I guess we would call it Ant, Julius Randle, and Gobert.
Yeah.
I know Ant is getting a lot of criticism for those Western Conference Finals. I thought he played fine.
Yeah.
Gobert got completely outplayed. Randall had like 3 good quarters. He was basically terrible.
Yeah, and that Western, it was such a bizarre, because like the first 2 rounds he was awesome, and then it just flipped. Yeah, terrible.
They just got so outplayed, and so I'm like, you kind of take a step back, and you're like, I don't know how close this team is, especially considering where they are in their cap situation. They're probably gonna have to lose Gilgeous-Alexander Walker. They're gonna hope to bring back Naz Reid. Probably should bring him back.
Yeah.
Randall could just opt in to $31 million and then just try to test free agency in 2026 when more teams have cap space, which I wouldn't rule that out. If that happens, like there could be extension talks. It's a tough spot for Minnesota to be in, but it does feel like they need to shake it up again, which is weird because they shook it up so dramatically in trading Towns after last year's Western Conference Finals run. At some point, do you risk shaking it up too much and ruining the structure and the DNA of a team that had been to the Western Conference Finals twice in a row? Do you ultimately have to take that step back in order to take that ultimate step forward? Because maybe the ceiling for a Gobert, Randall / Towns plus young Anthony Edwards team is just the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah. It's hard to envision how they maneuver through this little corner that they've built, kind of painted themselves in, right? Because I'm thinking, some of the rumors are like, all right, they went after Kevin Durant during the trade deadline, and that didn't work out. But like, do you want to commit to a 37, I think he is, 36, 37-year-old Kevin Durant at this point in his career? And he's still making $50+ million. I'm not sure if that's the move that you want. And plus, like, this is a team that's looking at the second apron. And how does that work? Are you going to trade McDaniels and Randall, or you're going to trade Gobert? And does that make sense for you if you're going to not have a bruising center in the middle now to be your defensive anchor? Like, there's team and roster construction questions that you have when you go out and make these trades. I saw Tony Jones of The Athletic. He suggested a Jaden McDaniels for Darius Garland swap. And like, that's interesting to me. I think that would be intriguing because it's like, all right, cool. Cleveland gets a wing that can defend and just be awesome on the wings for them. Just a stopper, if you will, whatever. And then, obviously the Wolves get their point guard of the future next to Ant, who can create off the bounce and kind of give them some juice. But that involves questions like, defensively, are you going to commit to him? Garland hasn't necessarily been like the healthiest player in the world. Are you willing to commit to that guy being healthy for you long term? It's like finding that player to pair next to Ant is the issue. I will say, I think they've done good in the draft. Like, I like Terrence Shannon. I think Rob Dillingham will eventually be a player. I even like Jalen Clark.
I like Jalen Clark a lot.
Yeah, so I was like, those guys can probably end up being rotation players for you next season. Do they just run it back and say, all right, this is what we're doing. We believe in the core. I kind of think of the first year they traded for Rudy Gobert, and it didn't look great. And then they came back the next season and made a massive leap, went to the Western Conference Finals. What if they just feel the same way? What if they're like, well, this was year one of us with Randall and this new look core. Let's just go into next season feeling the exact same thing. I'm not sure how much they could sell themselves on that, but there is a world in which they do.
Right. You can almost just say, look, let's just ride this out.
Yeah.
Get these young guys to develop a little bit more. Anthony Edwards can obviously take another leap. There's no question there. Let's just ride it out, win some playoff games, win a couple playoff rounds. Even if we don't make it back to the Western Conference Finals, it's okay.
Yeah.
just kind of play this string out and
And
let
like
these guys develop.
you probably let Nickeil Alexander-Walker walk because
Yeah.
you're like, all right, well, Jalen Clark, Terrence Shannon, those guys can kind of step into those minutes. Maybe Rob Dillingham gets more minutes, and you keep Naz Reid and Julius Randle. There is like the Randle question, like if you can somehow upgrade at that position, and obviously Kevin Durant is that guy that people bring up. But if there's another name out there, I'm not sure. Like they can make things interesting this summer.
Right.
And we've all heard about how this is this off season of transactions and all that. Could be a world in which they make an interesting move, but I just don't know who that player is for them.
Tim Connolly is obviously not afraid to get aggressive on the trade market. They don't have the draft capital. It's going to be funny to kind of keep revisiting the Rudy Gobert trade because it kind of was like, wow, that was a win last year where they kind of said, okay, maybe that ended up being okay. Now it doesn't look as bad as it did when they first traded for him because of 2 straight Western Conference Finals run. But right now it doesn't look as good as it did last summer based on how Gobert just didn't play very well in the Western Conference Finals. And that's a tough look. I don't know what the name is, but maybe the more interesting thing to do is say, all right, strip the roster of every player except for Anthony Edwards. Start building from scratch. What's the kind of team you would want around Anthony Edwards? And I don't know if this was just a symptom of playing this freaking Thunder team or just in general. But what struck me in those conference finals is Anthony Edwards needs to play in space.
Yeah.
And I think it's why he's had to fall back on that pull-up 3 and those step-back 3s so much. Because when he can't get downhill, he obviously needs to develop a mid-range game and a low-post game and stuff. That'll come with time. I'm not that concerned about it. Needs to get a floater game. But if you can put him in space, it just feels like he could go up another level, right? I almost think you build around this version of Anthony Edwards like you did young LeBron, except this Anthony Edwards has a 3-point shot that's really reliable.
Yeah, I think a stretch 5 is what you need just to be able to space the floor.
Who can also defend, because Minnesota fans will be like, we had one.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know, right? And like, also, that's really hard to find. Like, name me the guys who can shoot. And
I came up with one name that I think could be really interesting, but we have a segment on this later, so I'm gonna put a pin in that.
Cool. Yeah, like it's just hard to find those guys. They're called unicorns for a reason. It's really, really hard to find guys who could knock down threes consistently and be rim protectors for you and defend at a high level and be switch bigs and all that. Like, it's hard. That's a hard.
Can I throw a fake trade at you? That because you're at. What about Randall for Porzingis?
Ooh,
the Celtics get somebody to create a shot a little bit while Tatum's out. Comes off the books in a year. It doesn't help their cap situation.
Healthy is my thing. Yeah, that's my thing. It's like, do I trust Porzingis to be healthy? And
that would be the bet, right? If you're Minnesota, you say, all right, do we want another year of? Are we going to bet on Julius Randle repeating what he did in the playoffs for us next year?
Yeah.
Or is it a better bet to bet on Porzingis getting healthy? I think that would be the debate.
Yeah,
but it could be that would be interesting.
I like the other guy, and again, this is sort of names that we're throwing out here already, but like I've thrown around the idea of like Miles Turner, and obviously it seems like he's going to stay in Indiana given what they're doing right now, but he is a free agent this summer, and so it's like, all right, maybe you can figure out a world where the Pacers and Turner can come to some sort of sign and trade agreement, whatever. I'm not sure exactly what it would be, but yeah, I also, as we were talking, and this is not a stretch big by any stretch of the imagination, no pun intended, but like, what if you did a trade where, okay, Kevin Durant for Rudy Gobert, okay, Suns get their big, all right, you get Kevin Durant, and then you flip Julius Randle or Jaden McDaniels for Jared Allen.
Ooh.
And so you're like, Jared Allen and Kevin Durant is your front court now with whoever, whether it's Randall or McDaniels, and then you have Ant and those guys. I don't know. That's kind of like a reshape. You're like, you're kind of a similar tier team, but you're just reshaped into maybe a little bit younger with Allen, a little bit older. I don't know. But
then you got the spacing from Durant and all the stuff that he does offensively as a relief valve at that point, I suppose, for Ant. Ant gets to play with his favorite player. That's always a fun storyline. I like that. I think that they should be thinking about everything like that. Again, you
keep your options open. Yeah.
You risk shaking up too much of the DNA of a Western Conference team, but maybe at the end of the day, it's just Anthony Edwards is the only thing that matters.
I don't think they're afraid to do that, though, because they traded Karl Anthony Towns.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
I think you're right. And the Jared Allen thing is interesting, too, because maybe it doesn't necessarily always have to be a stretch 5, although every team would want that guy who could be, like, to your point, there's just not a lot of guys who can shoot the 3 and defend.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the vertical spacing part there
Mm-hmm.
that is also helpful for Ant, right? Because Gobert's just not a vertical spacer.
Yeah.
I'm not breaking news there.
Not
Right?
great
If you had a
hands
guy who
either.
could go up,
Icon.
get the ball at the high point,
Mm-hmm.
catch it, and dunk it, like who knows what that would have that feels like the kind of thing. Like we saw the Thunder even struggle with that a little bit with Aaron Gordon in the
Yeah.
previous round, right? And so that could be the other option too for Minnesota. All right. Last thing here.
All right.
We're gonna shift gears to the offseason.
Cool.
I gave you a heads up beforehand. We already teased it. But I want to talk about players not involved in rumors, or at least not heavily involved in rumors. Not the guys we're always talking about, Giannis, Durant, Ja Morant, these kinds of guys.
Mm-hmm.
Players not involved heavily in those rumors that if you were a GM of a team, you would be calling about. Just because you're like, what's going on there? Is this guy available? And you're going to do your due diligence on these guys. Let me give you my first name because I already teased it.
Okay.
Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, nice. He was on my list also, actually. Okay.
Extension eligible.
Yep.
What's going on with Memphis? If they do trade Ja Morant, you could say, well, double down on Jaren Jackson Jr., make him the face of the franchise, or you could say, tear it all down, start over.
Yeah.
They can go in either direction, and I think either one would be defensible. But he's extension eligible. Who knows what his thing is? Like, is he psyched to be in Memphis with Ja Morant, who's always in and out of the lineup? Who knows?
Yeah.
Does Memphis want to pay Jaren Jackson Jr. what it's going to cost to pay him? I would at least, if I were another GM, I would call. And if I was Tim Connolly, I would definitely call because that's the guy who would make a lot of sense next to Ant.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an incredible fit. That's like perfect for what they need. And you would need a haul, I think, if you're Memphis to really restart. I'm thinking like what would make sense from Minnesota side? They don't necessarily have their picks, and you're like, all right, McDaniels, and maybe Memphis is interested in Gobert, and they're like they want that rim protecting big man next to Ja. I don't necessarily know what the trade would be if you wanted to do that, but he's definitely an interesting name, and he's also a name that I think a lot of teams would be interested in just because he had a good season, flamed out in the playoffs, definitely did not have a good postseason. But I think he was awesome. He took a step in his career as sort of like an isolation scorer at his position, and that's just so tough to guard. If he can continue to refine that, that would be a very interesting trade target. And I would not be surprised if Memphis is like, all right, we don't want to get expensive. They're also a team that notoriously does not like to pay the tax. So it's like maybe they want to retool, if you will.
Right. And can they grab Dillingham in that deal, right? As a Ja Morant understudy or potentially a replacement or a guy who could at least step in when inevitably Ja gets hurt, the next time.
Yeah, I like it. Actually, this next guy that I have is a pretty interesting one for Minnesota too. Kobe White. How about Kobe White? So
I like it.
Not necessarily in trade rumors. He's also extension eligible, but he's not a guy that's going to take the extension that's on the table this summer because let me see, he makes $12 million. And I think he can only make 140% of that on this current extension. If he walks into free agency, he'll obviously be able to make much, much more than that. So it's a position where obviously he's not going to get an extension this summer, and the Bulls will have to walk into free agency hoping that he can re-sign. Will they be proactive and trade Kobe White in order to get something back? Or will they just, like the Bulls typically like to do,
right, I was about to say,
like really, really waste an asset here. I think Kobe is a really good player, really good point guard, has learned to be a pretty good ball handler in this league, obviously an incredible shooter. He would pair really well in Minnesota also. Just as a guy who's like a release valve next to Anthony Edwards, who can handle the ball a little bit as well, let Ant play off ball more. Think that's interesting. I also think he's an interesting guy for the Raptors and who I cover. I'm kind of working on a piece on that right now. So he's kind of front of mind for me with Kobe White, but he makes sense for a lot of teams. I think like you can sell yourself on him being a piece on a lot of these. I mean, think of Orlando.
I was just going to say, I'm already thinking Orlando should be calling. Can you just do hey, remember Wendell Carter Jr.? That would be kind of fun. Detroit to me makes some sense. If you're looking for that additional score. The Toronto thing is interesting. Would the idea to play Kobe White ahead of Quickly Quickly?
Yeah, there's a couple of different versions of that. So with the log jam at the front court with Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, and RJ Barrett, I do think RJ ends up being the odd man out here. And so it's an opportunity to flip RJ for a guy who is a guard. And I think the Raptors are desperately in need of other guards. Yes, there's IQ on the roster, but they just need extra creation on top of Emmanuel Quickley. And there's also a version where, you know, maybe if you have buyer's remorse on the Emmanuel Quickley contract, you trade Quickley for Kobe White, and, you know, you like him more. So there's two different versions of that trade that could work, but I think I'd lean towards the RJ version just because there's a bit of a logjam at the front court spot. Yeah.
Kind of like that for both teams.
Yeah. And it seems very ballsy to do. I don't know. It just, you know, ends
it's
up
just lateral enough.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, we could get the 9th with RJ
Right.
Barrett. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
It didn't work for two teams, but it will work for us. I got Norm Powell.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Clippers, just in general, what are they doing? And I know there's been some speculation, like, what's James Harden going to do? What kind of contract he's going to get? You know, and with Kawhi, would they ever explore trading Kawhi after this run and opening the arena? Like, maybe now is the time. That doesn't seem like a Steve Ballmer thing to do. I just think it's, hey, this team was pretty good. We made the playoffs. There's a lot of value in that, especially, you know, just because the arena opened for 1 year doesn't mean you're like, all right, cool, everybody's sold on it. No, you got to, you know, keep bringing these Clippers fans in. So those kinds of things seem a little too dramatic. And again, they're building. It's fine. You could be competitive and then just figure out what the next thing is when that time arrives. But with Powell, he's got a year left on his contract. He's 31 years old. He's the kind of guy that I think a lot of teams would want. And as good as he was for the Clippers last year, he might be more valuable at this point as an asset. It'd almost be like selling high, because that was a career year for Norm Powell. And I love Norm Powell, but are we really going to bank on him
doing it again?
And getting better at this stage in his career? Probably not.
Yeah.
So he was a guy that I actually was saying for the Thunder before the trade deadline. I was like, that would be a really cool addition to them. Obviously, they didn't need it. But teams like that can just use that other bit score that could either come off the bench or flank your superstar score or something like that. I think he could fit in a lot of different contexts. Super competitive. All the transition stuff. We know, you know, Norm Powell's been in the league forever. We know about him. I would be calling if I were a front office.
Yeah, I think he fits in a lot of playoff teams. I actually think he'd be cool on your Heat. I think he'd make sense. You know, that's another guy who's like really good scorer, solid defender, I think, at his position. And I know there's some salary situations with you guys where it's like, what is he at right now? What does he make?
It's a great question.
It's like 20.
It's like 20 something.
Yeah. So I don't know, Duncan Robinson and you know, stuff or something along the lines of that. Maybe something like that could work, because I think Powell would work well with you guys. Is like, makes decisions on the go. Obviously works incredibly well off the ball. Great shooter. Yeah, I don't know.
I like that. I hadn't thought about that, and I put him on my list. That's I'm going to be on the trade machine a little bit later. You got another name?
Yeah, I do. So this is another guy who's extension eligible this summer. This is a bigger name though, and I think he will eventually end up being in trade discussions, but I don't think he is right now. And that's Trae Young. So Trae, obviously, first of all, I should say I really like the team the Hawks are trying to build around Trae, because they have Dyson Daniels, Risa Shea, Jalen Johnson. Like that if you want wing defenders to pair alongside Trae, that's like a perfect group to do it with. That being said, there's like a general manager change that's happening on that team. They're probably going to end up looking at, like, you know, generally when a new guy comes into the front office, they're looking to build the team in their own image type of thing. And Trae's extension eligible. If they don't end up kind of agreeing on an extension, I wonder if it opens up the market for him to be traded. And so there are a lot of teams that I think would be interested in Trae Young. I honestly, there's name them, you know, you can go down the list and probably make a selling point for everybody. I think about, you know, some of these rebuilding teams like a Utah or Brooklyn would be really interested in Trae. But maybe there's a playoff team out there that I'm not thinking about that could also get in the mix for him. But yeah, Trae Young is another guy.
I think the extension eligible part of this is the key with Trae Young. Totally. And there's a theme here, obviously, but that whoever ends up leading Atlanta's front office is going to have to make a decision on Trae Young. And Trae Young's going to want, obviously, some direction, some clarity too, right? Like Trae Young's representatives are going to go up to whoever the new GM is and say, where are we at on this?
What are we doing?
Yeah. This is your star player. This should be your number one priority on day one of your job. And if that GM, and if those conversations go sideways, we could get to a point where that report comes out on a Monday morning,
Yeah.
and it's, hey, Trae Young has had a conversation with Atlanta's management, and both sides have mutually agreed to explore other opportunities or whatever, right? So I'm with you. I think that could be something that pops up, but we obviously need to know who's running the show there in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I think about the Sacramento Kings for Trae Young.
Oh my God, I was thinking about them just now. That's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your trade idea for the?
Well, I think he's exactly the kind of guy that the Kings would like. I think I'm stealing this from somebody. I want to say it was Zach Lowe, maybe on his show, said Sabonis for Trae Young trade, but I'm
Right.
sorry if I'm getting that wrong. But it was a Sabonis for Trae Young, just kind of swap. And I thought that was really interesting. But if I'm the Kings, I want to put Sabonis with Trae Young.
Yeah, I would want to do the same. So like what if you did like a Malik Monk and Keegan Murray type of thing,
right?
You know, and
That's interesting to me for both teams,
right? Because Atlanta gets a little bit younger. They have Malik Monk. It's like, hey, can Malik Monk run a show? Can he take a step to be a lead guard in this league? And then Keegan Murray, obviously good 3-and-D player, can add to that core. And then for the Kings, it's you have Trae, Levine, and Sabonis, and that might sound a little middling in the West. It probably is, but it's worth what they want to do, which is hunt out a playoff spot,
And they would still have DeRozan.
And they would still have DeRozan, who they probably end up trading. That's another guy that I would imagine is.
I would be calling about DeRozan also. Yeah. The other one that I thought of, and this was a Locked On Heat topic, if Miami strikes out on everything that they want to do and Sacramento strikes out on everything when they do, is it like sort of last round at the bar, they look at each other's eyes and say, DeRozan for Wiggins? Should we just do this?
Right.
Kind of helps both teams.
Yeah.
Fixes a lot of issues right away.
Yeah.
Was that yours, Trae Young? That was yours.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I got 3 more, but I won't do all of them.
Okay. All right.
PJ Washington.
Nice.
And Jaden Ivey. I'm going to put them together here. You could kind of just respond with whatever one you think is more interesting. But the idea with Washington is what position is he going to play in Dallas with all these bigs? It kind of feels like something like, they probably might trade Gafford here, but also with Washington, he's best as a power forward. He could still come off the bench as your third big. Yeah. But if I'm another team, I'm at least calling and seeing if I think I have a need for PJ Washington, I'd call. And with Ivy expiring on the rookie scale contract, I really liked what I saw from Ivy at the start of the year before the injury.
Yeah.
Is Detroit feeling a little bit like after this playoff run, hey, let's just upgrade that spot right away and go for it? Is that somebody that's gettable? Because I would take a flyer on Ivy because I've not given up my stock on him.
Yeah. I wonder if they're a team that's going to end up being patient and just being like, all right, cool. We'll bring back Schroeder and Malik Beasley and whatnot, and we'll extend Jaden Ivey. I think they might be able, just because of the injury this year, they might be able to not pay him too much. Like they can afford to maybe negotiate a little bit and say, hey, this is what we're offering you, take it or leave it type of thing. And if you want, we can kind of revisit this in the summer. So I would be surprised if Detroit does it, but the PJ Washington thing is undoubtedly interesting. And that was another guy who I was like, maybe Norm Powell for PJ Washington, like a swap there to get a guard for a wing.
Yeah.
Because Dallas obviously needs guards. I'm also trying to think of guards that Dallas could get. This is sort of where I'm at. It's like, can they go out and get another guy to add to this
Kobe
team?
White could make some sense there too. Yeah.
Kobe White could make some sense there. Obviously, they've been linked to Drew Holiday. That's an interesting name. So both of those names are interesting because I think they probably will end up getting moved, especially PJ Washington. I'm less I'm like confident on Ivy, although I could see a world where they're like, we have this player that we can trade for, and Ivy is the chip that we can use. That would make a lot of sense for me. Okay. This is we kind of mentioned them already, but the Darius Garland, Jared Allen thing, I don't think they will get traded because the Cavs won 64 games. But like, there is a world in which they decide, hey, we believe Mobley can be our full-time 5. And he showed, I mean, they staggered them more this year than they have any other year that they've been together. And I think that's worth mentioning because they are now leaning, they're sort of edging and saying like, hey, we're going to go with Mobley as our full-time 5 moving forward. Open the door for a Jared Allen trade. Maybe it ends up opening the door for a Darius Garland trade. I would love for them to get into the Giannis conversation with that. I don't know if that's enough for them to get into the Giannis conversation with that. I think there's also other stuff out there that they can do that could be interesting for just one of those players. We talked about the Minnesota situation, but I think there's a world in which they can kind of keep the same mentality and identity of what they want to do, but just take out one of those rotation guys and maybe make it into 2 or 3 that would make sense for them. But yeah,
I was playing around the other day with a Jared Allen for Mitchell Robinson swap. Because Allen could be on the court more than Robinson.
Yeah.
And if you decide that Cat is your 4, if you're the Knicks, then you need Robinson. I wouldn't trust him to start at the 5 all season. He would just get hurt.
Yeah.
Allen is durable. I'd at least trust him to eat those innings.
Yeah.
And then if you're the Cavs, you're saying, well, we don't really need Jared Allen as a full-time 5, but boy, would it be cool to get into that look every once in a while.
Right, a backup.
We'll start Mobley at the 5, back up Robinson, and then we can kind of transition into that look when we think we need it for a certain matchup. And Robinson defensively, plus Mobley defensively, I mean, forget about it.
Yeah.
I was toying around with that, but I don't think the Knicks would do it because they've just seen Jared Allen's playoff failings up close.
That is true.
Person, and they probably have a bad taste in their mouth.
Yeah, I struggle to find like a spot. I mean, people are going to say the Lakers and do like the Austin Reeves thing, but I don't know why the Cavs would want Austin Reeves here.
Unless they move Garland in another move.
Right, yeah. So it's tough for me to find like another destination for Jared Allen. I'm trying to think like maybe Sacramento would be interested here, but then again, what would Sacramento give up to the Cavs? Is it Keegan Murray? I don't know.
Is there a way that they can get him to Phoenix? Can they get Garland and Allen to Phoenix
for KD?
KD?
I guess that would be the trade right there. Yeah, because it's what
is that the salary?
$39 million for Garland and $20 million. Yeah, that's basically the salary. Basically looking at the exact salary. It's not bad.
Good. That's not bad. That's not bad.
And then you have Mobley, KD, Donovan Mitchell. I mean, there's worse teams than that. You know what I mean? You can definitely do a lot with that.
You would have to probably do it in 2 separate trades, but you'd have to, I don't know, they could figure out the cap part of it.
Yeah.
My last one is Draymond Green.
Ooh, okay.
If I thought I needed Draymond, I'd call. I don't know that the Warriors want to trade him. My guess is that they don't. But I would call and just see what's the temperature. Because
so my question there is like, who do you think would want Draymond?
Right. I think there's a difference between who would want Draymond and who should trade for Draymond. Because I could see the Knicks coming away from this and being like, we need Draymond.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even though they'd get lambasted on NBA Twitter.
Yeah.
I think a team like Detroit, a team like heck, I could even see San Antonio just being like, oh, we didn't really want Giannis, or like, but like, what if we had Draymond and Wemby? Like that would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Just a team that wanted that defensive presence, that veteran presence, leadership, whatever it might be. And if you can get him for cheap, I don't know, it'd be interesting.
That is.
I don't know what the fit is, right? With the Jimmy Butler trade, really, it was a win of a trade for Golden State, despite how they went out in the playoffs. I still think it was a win for a trade for them. But they can't really play Jimmy and Draymond together. They were able to do it post-trade deadline and just have Draymond at the 5, but like that, they can't start next season with Draymond playing the 5.
Yeah.
Quentin Post is not the answer there. The Jonathan Kuminga thing is out there. Who knows if they're actually going to trade him, move him, whatever that. They could be forced to just bring him back next year. And we know that Joe Lacob, how he feels about Kuminga. He's super high on him.
Yeah.
So he could just say, we're not trading this guy for nothing, which might ultimately be what the price is.
Yeah.
So you can't bring those all, like it just seems tough to bring all 3 of those guys back. You just traded for Jimmy. If you can't trade Kuminga, do you end up just at least quietly taking phone calls on Draymond? Again, I don't think they're moving him. If I'm a front office that I think I could use him, I'd call.
The interesting team here, and I'll just mention another team, is Phoenix.
Ooh.
Because there was a conversation at the deadline where it was like, all right, cool, Draymond for KD. And to me, before the Jimmy trade, I didn't understand that because I was like, all right, how does that look for this Warriors team having KD instead of Draymond and no center behind them? Right. But I think now with Jimmy and some of the cap flexibility that they have, they can go out and maybe sign a center or try to trade for a center using like the Moody kind of salary if you want. Hey, they could go for Mitchell Robinson if they want. to me, that might make sense, especially because Ishbia is a Michigan guy and loves Draymond. Like, I'm pretty sure they went to the same school, right? I think that was a thing.
Michigan State. Yep.
Right, Michigan State. So maybe that's something where they
kinda
just
like that.
want Draymond and Devin Booker and Draymond, and maybe there's I don't know. That's just something
Matt
that
Ishbia
popped
is
in
just
my
looking at the Knicks and be like, so the way to do it is just make sure everybody went to the same college, right? That's
mind. Yeah,
that's what we're gonna do.
that's funny.
The Nuggets could be interesting.
Nuggets could be interesting, like a Michael Porter for
Correct. Draymond and Moody to
Yeah.
Denver for Michael Porter Jr. And now you've got MPJ's spacing.
Yeah.
That could be.
But man, I mean, Denver doesn't have spacing in the first place, and you're like, what are
that
they?
would be pretty rough.
Even David Adelman in his postseason interview thing, he just said like, what he was asked, what is the thing you need, and he's like, shooting. That's the only thing.
Okay, so not Draymond. All right, last one would be the Lakers, right?
Yeah.
Draymond, clutch client. Not exactly the center that they're looking for, but they would easily talk themselves into it.
Yeah,
right?
it would really like lean into that small ball five identity that they had to finish this season. So I could see that. Yeah.
Reeves feels like too much to give up.
Yeah.
But is there a Dorian Finney-Smith plus Hachimura thing maybe, or a Finney-Smith plus the draft pick that was supposed to be for Mark Williams, or
right? Yeah.
And like a Dalton Connect piece or something like that could be interesting.
Can I give you one last one?
Please.
LaMelo Ball.
All right.
I don't know if they'll end up doing it, but this is another guy where it's like, Charlotte obviously is heading in they still are very far away from competing, and I kind of selfishly want to see LaMelo in a situation where he's actually trying to play and win basketball games. And, watching Halliburton this year, and I'm not saying they're similar players. I think Halliburton is a much more elevated version at this point in his career. Obviously, like just more refined, less turnover prone, et cetera, et cetera. But just like a big guard who is really, really creative and can be put in a situation in an offensive system that like makes sense to him. I would like to see that. And so I don't know who would even be that team. Or who would be willing to take on LaMelo, who obviously has his fair share of injuries and ankles and whatnot. But that's just another thing where I'm like, like, what if that could be a thing? What if like San Antonio is like, we'll swap two for, like, I don't know. I'm not sure what it would be. But
I'm with you on LaMelo. I haven't sold my stock on LaMelo. I think I want to see him in a place that prioritizes winning, that's actually trying to do stuff.
Yeah.
He was borderline unwatchable this past season with these one-legged sidestep threes and all this stuff. But I'm like, Brandon Miller got hurt early in the year, and I don't really know what else he was supposed to be doing. Like, he doesn't pass it. Well, who's he supposed to pass it to?
Yeah, they knew their objective very early into this season. Yeah.
So LaMelo was just out there being like, maybe I could be the scoring champion, And it's like, all right, cool. Put him in a situation like what Indiana did with Halliburton, where they said, we're going to build a team around you. We got some players. We got a good coach. We're going to go out and try to win some games. I don't know what that situation is because LaMelo is so high usage, but I wonder if you could bring him into a situation and bet on the talent, the size, the creativity, all the magical things that he has, and just say he'd be less selfish here, and we think we can harness him in a way that Charlotte just couldn't. It would be a fascinating bet if he landed on the right team.
Because also, like, what would Charlotte want in that situation? Because they're already young. They're already, like, in a position to tank if they want to again next season. Like, what else would they want? Would they want to accelerate their timeline? So then that might not match up with whoever they're trading LaMelo to. But if they're trying to go for younger and get more picks, then now I'm envisioning some sort of draft day trade where it's like, cool, San Antonio says, we'll give you Dylan Harper, but you can take the second overall pick and we'll take LaMelo Ball. And
we know what they're probably they're trying to rebuild in Boston's image, right? With Charles Lee, and you looked at how many threes that they took, so they could say, who's our Derek White? Because we kind of feel like we need that more than we need LaMelo.
Yeah.
Is there a LaMelo for Jalen Suggs thing that makes some sense? Jalen Suggs plus some stuff.
Yep.
I don't love LaMelo or Trae Young for that matter in Orlando. They just feel a little bit too high usage for me.
Yeah.
But could be interesting.
Yeah.
S, thanks so much for jumping on, man. This was fun.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, man.